Perfect, and we're here. Pavlos, thanks so much for doing this, especially on short notice.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, let's see. A lot has happened in the last 48 hours. Just to make sure that anyone listening to this in the farther future knows the general context, we are discussing the U.S. action to send military personnel and quote unquote law enforcement personnel into Caracas in Venezuela and to remove the president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores. Am I remembering correctly? Okay. Who are now on their way to New York, presumably to face some sort of legal action carried out by the Southern District of, of, of New York.
And they are in New York now.
They are in, they okay, so they're here. So I'm sure that as we discuss things, we'll get into a lot more detail, but that's just the general context which prompted this last minute meeting and podcast. And so we're really excited to get your insights, Pavlos. Thanks so much for doing this. So I was going over everything that's happened and trying to get commentary from both sides of our political spectrum. I think it would be an interesting place to start to simply get your reaction to the actions of the night of the third, specifically entering a foreign country and removing its elected or not, its at the very least, its de facto leader. Can we start there? And then obviously there's about 18 different branches of the conversation I'd like to get to when we can.
Yeah, I guess I'm generally on the non-interventionist side.
Okay.
I don't particularly like that as a label because it suggests that an action intervention is never preferable or something like that, and that's not actually my position. But in terms of interventionist versus non-interventionist, I would fall much more on the non-interventionist side. On the level of principle, I like what John Quincy Adams articulated in the 1820s when he was Secretary of State to Monroe, articulating the Monroe Doctrine. JQA articulates a beautiful application of the Declaration of Independence's principles on foreign policy, the right of nations, essentially saying that the United States ought to respect the natural rights of other nations, the laws of nations, the law of nature that establishes independent nations, and the famous line from this John Quincy Adams speech is that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, right? She's the well-wisher of liberty everywhere, but the vindicator only of her own liberty. In other words,
Wow.
This is the great conservative American alternative to, George W. Bush, right? Or Woodrow Wilson, for that matter. It's a kind of a very practical but principled argument for America and nations generally minding their own business.
Mm-hmm.
The deep calling of elected officials or just of whoever is ruling a nation being to secure the good of their own people, their own community, their own nation. And then the default becomes non-interference, which is not an absolute prohibition, right? There are times when the duty of the elected official or the leader is to do something in another country violating their sovereignty if they have committed certain actions that would lead you to be justified in doing so. But I'm much more on that side than on the, whatever you want to call it, the interventionist side, the liberal internationalist side, the neoconservative side, whatever. All the panoply of other positions in foreign policy thinking that would lead you to be happy to be intervening on many occasions, which there's large elements of that in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. So that's my general position. Regarding this intervention, let me take one more step before we get to this intervention. I've been therefore very cheered by the career of Donald Trump. Right, it's worth noting, going all the way back 10 years at this point to 2015, the infamous South Carolina GOP debate in the summer of 2015, when Donald Trump said to the face of Jeb Bush, brother of George W. Bush, that the Iraq War was a giant mistake. He said this in South Carolina, very notably one of the most military-heavy states in the country. And he said this at a time when, although it had become clear to the country generally the Iraq War was a mistake, it was still verboten within Republican circles to say this when the neoconservative, interventionist, democracy promotion school of thought was still regnant in the Republican Party. Trump broke the hold of that faction over the Republican Party. I think that's a very good thing, and he has ushered in a new era of, I think, more pragmatic and more responsible, more realistic thinking about what the use of military force ought to be. So in general, I'm very enthusiastic about Trump's approach over the last 10 years. And I mention all of that because in this, both in the last term and in this term in particular, Trump has built up a lot of goodwill with me personally.
Oh,
In foreign policy. So if you go back to last summer, the strikes on Iran.
yeah.
Again, this is the kind of thing where I think intervening in the Middle East, this is not going to work out well for America or for the foreign people involved. But Trump showed the ability to weigh in on the side of a conflict, on our ally side in a conflict, make a major difference in setting Iran back in its nuclear program. You know, with the hindsight of several months, we did not get dragged into some
morass,
which was the concern at the time. I think a legitimate concern at the time, but he showed a way of sort of finding the middle road between so-called isolationism and full-on nation-building interventionism, which is the direction that we've stuck in for the last couple of decades. So Trump proved that he can do this. Now, this, of course, is different in every case, right? So I want to approach each case individually. And so coming now to Caracas in Venezuela and the extradition, that's not the right word. There's another
extraction.
Yeah, the extraction of Maduro from Venezuela. I have that same mixture of emotions that I had when we bombed Fordo, the Iranian nuclear facility, which is that, wow, this is very impressive. Like, no one besides the United States can do this in terms of our hardware, in terms of our personnel, in terms of our daring, in terms of our technical capacities, in terms of our planning. Like, this is just, it's an amazing thing that the United States military can do. There's that element. There's a sense of foreboding, which is, I don't want to get stuck in some kind of extended foreign war for dubious reasons for a long period of time. And did that happen in Iran? No, it didn't. But, you know, that was a concern at the time. Is that going to happen in Venezuela? I have no idea. I hope not. I have reasons to suspect that it will not be. But at the same time, it seems like our involvement there already, we're saying it's going to be much more hands-on than anything with Iran. So I have that mixture of emotions, and I guess the last component to it is I am more open to American intervention in the Western Hemisphere than in other hemispheres. This is going back to John Quincy Adams and the Monroe Doctrine, and just the facts of geography. We have the luxury as a nation of having two massive oceans between us and any near peer competitor power. And that has been the case throughout our history, at least for the last 200 years. If you want to go to the colonial period, it gets a little bit murkier. If you want to talk about the Comanches as a near peer power in like the 1830s, right? Yeah, it's murkier. But in terms of, you know, the middle and second half of the 19th century and then throughout the 20th century, we have had this amazing insulation from world affairs and insulation from our rivals. And part of that, of course, is the fact that our near neighbors are weak. And that's just a blessing in certain respects, right? We do not have to have the kind of society and military and so on that France, for example, has historically had, with, you know, neighboring nations right next to it that are real peers. That changes a society, that changes the place of a military in a society, that has all kinds of knock-on effects. And we are just blessed by God, geography, and everything to not have to live in that situation. So
You don't have to guard your borders the way other nations just take it as a standard course of action to guard their borders.
And I think along with that great blessing, this is sort of the dark side of that blessing might be that our ideology of progressivism that really took hold about a century and a quarter ago, that kind of lack of connection with reality has been able to take hold in our political thinking and our foreign policy thinking, and we've spent a large part of the last century wasting our position, frankly, in getting involved in the way we prosecute World War I, World War II, subsequent wars, with truly idealistic notions of what victory is. Like, the conditions of victory are imposing permanent peace on the entire world. And that's just frankly insane. It's unrealistic. It's unnatural. And so all of that said, we are in a position in which we have the greatest military in the world. That continues to be the case despite the best efforts, I think, of the Biden administration and the Obama administration, and despite the truly horrible mistakes of especially the Bush administration in the early 2000s. We still have the greatest military in the world. We still occupy the most favorable place on Earth and are in this position.
In terms of just geographic positioning.
Absolutely. Okay. And I am grateful if we have a leader who is willing to use the amazing tools that the military gives to him to advance the interests of the United States, then that's a good thing. And I'm grateful for that. Very hard to see that, 48 hours after this surprising event. Yeah. Very hard to see which direction this is going to go in. I guess I'd say I am cautiously optimistic about what happened in Venezuela and what is going to happen in the near future there. The reason I'm cautiously optimistic is because, and yet still I'm open to, all of the reservations that my friends.
You're open to an erosion of optimism.
Yes, and I've heard those who are Trump supporters, those who are conservatives. I've heard their concerns, and I think they are legitimate, and maybe they will win the day in terms of how events unfold. But Trump has been, as far as I can tell, Trump is pursuing the most modest, limited version of regime change possible. It's almost comically limited. You go in and you snag one guy and his wife, from the top of regime. That is as limited a regime change operation as you can imagine. It's not de-Baathification, right? It's not taking out the entire party structure. It's not trying to change the form of government. Some of these details are still emerging and rumors are swirling at this point still. It seems like the Trump plan, however, is take Maduro out and then force whoever is left to work with us. And the ambiguity of that whoever is left, right? It's Rodriguez.
Is it Delcy Rodriguez or is it some other opposition party leader?
But it seems to be the former,
right?
And I think the point there is that Trump is bracketing the concern of Venezuela's domestic regime. I think this is actually a prudent and wise thing for an American leader to do, is to recognize as secondary, if not tertiary, that question in a foreign nation and say, the important thing is how this foreign nation treats America. And that's the thing that we care about. And so we can put pressures on this nation that's in our backyard in various ways. And going in and extracting Maduro is the most invasive form of that we've conducted, and a really extraordinarily invasive form. But so far, Trump has not gone the full neoconservative democracy building, even the full anti-communist direction that we might have expected him to go, and that many may have hoped him to go, of saying, of course, we're not going to work with anyone who belonged to the Chavez-Maduro regime. We're going to work with the opposition and so on. So he hasn't gone that direction at all. I think he just sees the people who are currently in power are still in power to some extent. They have enough of the military, enough of the wealth, enough of the power in Venezuela to make a difference. And we're going to start telling them what difference to make. We're going to start telling them what to do with their oil, what to do with their relation with China, what to do with their immigration, and so on and so forth. And I'm cautiously optimistic that is a much more viable way of intervening in foreign nations than what we've seen in the last 25 years. There's that, John Quincy Adams is in the back of my head saying, but this is not how nations are supposed to treat each other. And I'm still listening to him. Right. And that's part of the qualification on my cautious optimism. But I guess there's more to say there about what is the difference between the 1820s and the 2020s in terms of our adversaries. China is on the other side of the ocean, but China is also in our smartphones and also in our backyard in Latin America. And so what do we do about that? What kind of intervention or non-intervention is prudent to pursue in nearby nations, given those realities?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting too because the first thing I think Rubio was saying was that Maduro was an enemy of America, and that's why he went in. He said he is cartel drugs and trading and all those things he was involved with for killing thousands of Americans' lives, and that's why they went in. So it's interesting that it wasn't really they wanted to change Venezuela. It was like this guy is using the country to attack the U.S. We repeatedly told him not to do that and keeps going. So enough was enough almost. Which is interesting because it's not like trying to restructure anything as like the main goal, but just to stop an enemy of America.
Yeah, here I'd make a distinction. I think it's just helpful in thinking about what regime change is. And growing up in the early 2000s, regime change and nation building, these are just two sides of the same coin, right? We go into Afghanistan and we start to nation build. We go into Iraq, we knock out their leaders, and we start to nation build. These things seem to go together, but they're conceptually distinct. I think they might be in reality distinct as well. At least it's possible. The precedent for them being so intertwined, of course, is World War II and what we do in Germany and Japan after the war, where we knock over the regime, its most capacious sense of the word regime, and then really rebuild the nation, rebuild the regime, and occupy it long term in order to produce a different society and a different politics. So I would say that regime itself could mean three different things. And so regime change could mean three different things. Regime in the most narrow sense is just the guy at top. So that would be Maduro or Hussein or whomever, right, the different cases. The person who holds the most authority and the power.
Okay.
In a secondary sense, regime could mean the ruling class. So it's everyone who participates in a high level of decision.
The court.
Power. Yeah, the court. And maybe that's the people who cycle through the highest office. Maybe that's the one person who's there for decades and also his family or his friends or his clients or whomever. But there's a larger class there that could be included regime. And then the other sense in which regime is used is just a form of government. So is it a democracy or is it an autocracy or an oligarchy or whatever? And when we in the past, whether it's Germany or Japan, World War II, or Iraq and Afghanistan in the last couple of decades, when we've pursued regime change, we've done full spectrum regime change, right? You knock out the guy at the top, you knock out and purge and keep out of power the full ruling class, anyone who has affiliation with that person or that ideology that was previously regnant in that nation. And we want to go further. We want to institute a very different form of government. We don't want some kind of Islamic theocracy. We want a democracy, or we don't want some kind of, Ba'athist dictatorship. We want a democracy. We've pursued full spectrum regime change instead of a more modest version of just take out the guy at the top, or maybe just take out the guy at the top and also his coterie and then leave the structure in place. I think what we're doing in Venezuela is that more modest version. I think Trump is trying it out, and who knows how it would work, and how much of it is it a slippery slope from the most modest to the a little bit more extended to the most full bore regime change.
Most interventionist, yeah.
But I think by snubbing Mikado, not saying, of course, the opposition is the legitimate government and that's who we support, by not going down that road at all so far. Again, it's very early, 48 hours in, but Trump has indicated, when he said in that first press conference on Saturday, we're going to run the country. That's where that was the line where I almost had a heart attack and I thought, what are we doing? This is the bad old days of neoconservatism again. But putting that together, it's hard to take any one thing that Trump says and run with it consistently. For better or for worse, you've got to follow the weave and put all of the statements together. And maybe there's some strategic ambiguity there of sort of keeping people on their toes, which is upsetting as a citizen because you want to know what your leaders are doing and you want to be persuaded by them and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, as far as I can tell from these first 48 hours, he seems to be content to have extracted an enemy of America, brought him, right? There were law enforcement personnel there. There were FBI agents, right, as part of this raid, apparently. Brought him to the American judicial system, removed a foreign enemy from a hostile country that he was using as hostile actors against our country. And just said, hey, whoever's left over, start working with us or the same or worse will happen to you. That seems like, I think in real time, that's what the most modest version of regime change looks like. It's taking out one person and then saying, whoever's left in the building, start cooperating with us or we'll take you out as well. And then, we'll move to the next person. We'll see what happens there.
I'm very curious, though, what your thoughts are on U.S. law enforcement acting beyond the borders of the United States. Yeah, there's so many questions that I want to get to, but I do want to start there because I know that my first reaction to watching this unfold, yesterday morning, it was starting to hit the news in any sort of volume. And I just remember thinking, golly, I don't know enough about the legal theory behind our law enforcement acting beyond our own borders. What are your thoughts there?
It makes me uncomfortable.
It makes you okay.
But I also want to be realistic about context, which is, was it 1989, the U.S. invasion,
The invasion of Panama. Mm-hmm.
And taking out Manuel Noriega, striking parallels down to the date of actually getting Maduro and Noriega. That was a law enforcement action. That's the way that it was framed, in order to nab a criminal on drug charges who happened to be foreign and out of the country and president of that country. And so it was sort of an extradition, extraction of a foreigner on foreign soil who just happened to be running a country. And we did, and that was done by George H.W. Bush. And I guess why am I mentioning all of this, besides the regional parallels and the drug-related parallels? How scandalized should we be by something that George H.W. Bush, who's like the image of WASP respectability in the 20th century, who, for conservatives, right, he's the vice president to Ronald Reagan, and he's sort of like the bonus third term to Reagan, and he conducts the first Iraq war, and everyone thinks very highly of that war, whatever you think about the second one, right, just on the right, broadly speaking. And this is, 1 year into his term as president that he conducts this law enforcement action, which I think are just the same questions, the same dubious legal character of what we just did in Venezuela, using the military to apprehend a suspect. I suppose you'd have to call him a suspect if he hasn't been brought to trial yet.
Right. Right.
He's been that you, Mr. Maduro. I mean, we better find him guilty, right? But we suspect that you are guilty of all kinds of crimes related to drugs and guns and so on and so forth. It's striking the parallels between them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to what if we are, and maybe we should be, if we are uncomfortable with this kind of reach of the law and the use of law enforcement, the use of the military by the law enforcement, or maybe more realistically here, using the kind of law enforcement angle as a pretext for military attack, the use of military force. That problem is very old, right? It's almost as old as I am, 1989. Mm-hmm. It's been going on for a long time, and it's there at the what in retrospect to the Republican Party today looks like the height of respectability of the Republican Party in emergence. George H.W. Bush starting his one term as president. So I don't have a great theory about how this is legal, legitimate. It seems like if you go one direction and say, this is a military action, then you might get caught up on saying, well, there was no declaration of war. Well, what about Congress and so on and so forth? If you go the other direction and say, this is a law enforcement action, then you get into this problem of, well, Should our law enforcement agencies be authorized to act beyond our borders in a nominally sovereign country? It's not like it's the FBI cooperating with like British law enforcement or something like that, and the system there. It is made more complicated by the fact that the international community, to the extent that it's a real thing, like a huge number of nations, ourselves, European nations, and so on, did not recognize Maduro as the legitimate president. Right?
And this goes back to his election takeover, and that was in 2014. Is that correct?
I might have the date on that wrong, but that sounds roughly right.
Roughly right. Okay. Anyway, it seems that the general consensus is that not that he stole the election, he brazenly prevented a change in power, despite even the election itself being demonstrably in favor of his opposition.
I don't know what happened then. I know that what you just described happened a year ago, right?
Again, yeah, okay. Yeah. In 2024.
Yes, in 2024.
Okay. Gotcha. Maybe I had the date wrong.
So I guess you could construct a kind of legal fiction that this was all by the book if you said this man who is pretending to be the legitimate president of this foreign country actually is not, and he's a criminal, and we've identified, this is something that we have not done to my knowledge, but we identified the true legitimate ruler of Venezuela, and that person said, yeah, go and get him, or something like that. That obviously that would be laughable from a realistic perspective, and we didn't pursue that option anyway. So sure, all of this, I would prefer to live in a time and a regime that did not operate this way. But I guess what I'd like to point out with the comparison to Panama is that this is, to a certain extent, we've been operating this way my entire life.
Okay.
And so I'd at least like these things to be done to the benefit of the American people. That's my baseline evaluation for our leaders is, are they working to advance the interests of the American people? I guess I see questions of legitimacy, legality, certainly morality as bumpers on the bowling alley that you're not supposed to go in this direction while you're pursuing the good thing that you're pursuing.
Right.
The laws of morality are not reneged when you're in a state of war. You're supposed to guide your conduct, but entering the state of war is a prudential judgment by the leader of the nation. And I much prefer, and I have greater trust in Trump than in any other president in my lifetime, that he's entering these states with our good in mind and with a reasonable plan to get to a state of true peace that advantages us at the end of the day.
Wow. A lot of the internet disagrees with you.
On the right, on the left?
Yeah. It's remarkable to hear the way much of the commentary is really piling on the Trump administration and Trump himself on every conceivable angle that you've mentioned. Tom, you were
Well, it's interesting trying to think of your distinction between law enforcement and military. It's interesting that it almost seems like Congress has allowed us to attack an entire nation by declaring war on the nation. In reality, Venezuela isn't trying to attack us, but Maduro is using his power in a tyrannical way to use Venezuela's resources against us. In reality, we just have a few enemies there. The rest of Venezuela really likes us, and they're happy that they're liberated. So maybe Trump is trying to suggest that, hey, we need to learn how to operate and attack specific targets outside of our territory without actually declaring war on the country because we're not at war with the country. So I wonder if that might be, I don't know enough about the Declaration of like how that works, but would that be a fair way to describe what he's trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, just the phrase declaring war, that I find that triggering.
Yeah.
Right? Because when is the last time that the United States Congress declared war? It was 1941, 1942.
Yeah.
It's Japan and allies. They're the allies of Japan, the winter of 41 to 42. And how many wars, in the common understanding of the term, have we fought since then?
Right. Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf 1 and 2, Panama, a lot.
Yeah, we can keep going, right? Afghanistan, right? All of these are, uses of military force that are, right, the AMUF, the Authorization of Use of Military Force, that's from September 20, 2001, that enables us to go into Afghanistan is, in my mind, this infamous document where Congress says, yeah, we're going to write basically a blank check to the president, whoever he may be, Bush and then Obama and so on, to go after anyone related to the 9/11 attacks. And so we wind up using special forces in like the Philippines because there's a Muslim insurgency there that has some kind of indirect relation to Al Qaeda, under the pretext, under the warrant given by the Authorization of Use of Military Force to go after the guys who did 9/11. And so we have, it's hard. So it's hard in two ways. On the one hand, it's hard not to have contempt for Congress and contempt for our political institutions, given how degraded they have become. On the other hand, it's hard for me to say that because I love the Constitution. I think we had a great regime and we still have elements of that. But so much of it is, it seems to me, a fiction that is still, still evokes enough emotion in the American people on the right and on the left that you can use it as a stick with which to beat your political enemies, to say that this is unconstitutional or to defend and say this is constitutional. Congress is so dysfunctional and has made itself dysfunctional over the last century by creating the administrative state, which is to say by creating a whole slew of agencies that are nominally under the executive, but we've seen after FDR that they're not actually answerable to anyone. And that's the big drama of the Trump administration, is try to make the administrative state answerable to the executive again so that they can be answerable to them. We've seen Congress just sort of sell its soul and sell its power away, and sell its responsibility away for over a century at this point.
And you think that started with Woodrow Wilson in the...
Yeah, certainly Wilson starts it, but yeah, really I'd say New Deal era, so a little bit less than a century.
Okay, so FDR was basically what gave it, maybe Woodrow Wilson gave it birth, but FDR raised it.
Yes, and this is just very standard, right? This is the progressive movement, and you can find conservative academics and historians sort of detailing this and lamenting it. You can find liberal historians detailing this and rejoicing over it, right? So when you get that result, you say, okay, there's actually something there, right? There's actually a substantial change in the regime. And although not as many people say it as I think ought to, this is a change in our domestic regime that we've had. There's elements of continuity where we still have parts of our form of government operating according to the U.S. Constitution. And there are other parts that are added onto it and maybe even contradictory to its spirit or to its letter that are wielding tremendous power and have been for decades at this point. This is part and parcel of us becoming a world empire and losing our self-governing Republican character. So obviously I'm going far afield from that.
This is great. This is absolutely fantastic.
But with all of that as background, I'm a little bit exhausted by the pearl clutching over whether this is constitutional or not. That doesn't mean that something being unconstitutional is not important. But I have seen so many flagrant instances of unconstitutional behavior from both parties in my lifetime, and so many missed opportunities, I guess, to actually govern in our interest that are justified by saying, well, this is not constitutional. I'd like a duly elected president, as Trump is, to operate within what the powers that the Constitution gives them to secure the American interest, to secure the interest of our nation and our people. And it's not yet clear to me what the connection is between this event and our interest. And so I'm not, wholeheartedly endorsing this right now. I have that kind of ambiguity about it. But as I said at the beginning, Trump has built up a good deal of goodwill with me in terms of how he's conducted foreign policy in both of his terms.
And it sounds as if by that you mean, and let me make sure I understand, that his general approach to military action beyond our own borders, you're saying, I think, that that tends to be limited, brief, and not connected to attempts to reform the society of the countries in which these actions are taken.
Exactly.
Okay. That's
And each of those points is important. Right?
okay.
Limited, brief, and I'd say realistic.
Okay.
Right, which is to say not tied up in this sense of sort of utopian vision of I'm going to be able to remake the world in my image or the image that I
Mm.
that frankly the mainstream of conservatism and progressivism in my lifetime has both bought into. They've both bought into that mission of America, our mission being to transform the entire world into some version of ourselves. That's sort of the mainstream of both parties after the Cold War. And you have dissidents on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
On the right, you've got Pat Buchanan in the 1990s, and you've got Trump sort of picking up that torch in the mid-2010s of saying, no, maybe we fumbled the post-Cold War period, and maybe we fumbled the era of globalization. And I'm not sure Trump actually wants to go as far as Buchanan called for in the 1990s and restoring us to a republic that operates according to our founding principles. Not sure he's as far in that direction as someone like Buchanan would call for, but he's a lot closer to that than any other president in my lifetime, and more importantly, he's a lot closer to actually trying to renegotiate our position in the world to benefit the American people and the American country than anyone else in my lifetime. I don't mean to say that George Bush didn't think that's what he was doing, but I think the reasoning process of the neoconservatives who sort of led the Bush administration that Bush bought into was the only way for us to be safe after 9/11 or before it. The only way for us to be safe is to bring freedom to the rest of the world, because everyone loves freedom. I'm paraphrasing from Bush's second inaugural, I think, at this point. And they're repressed. So if we can break their chains, then they will enjoy freedom and be grateful to us. And as they enjoy freedom, they'll become more like us, and they will not want to harm us because they attacked us on 9/11 because they hate our way of life. And, that's true. That statement by Bush after 9/11 that they hate our way of life, and that's why they attacked us. That was true, but I don't think in the sense in which he thought it was, and I don't think the solution was what he thought it was. So, all which to say, I don't mean that everyone who disagrees with me is of ill will or something like that.
Okay.
But I do think that the kind of foreign policy Trump is pursuing has been thus far much more consistent with the laws of nature, what scripture and religious tradition call for, what the American founders call for, which is there are different nations in the world. They have leaders. Those leaders ought to secure the good of their nations. And there are just and unjust ways of doing so. And it will be better for you materially and spiritually to pursue the just ways. And when you enter into something like extracting this foreigner who happens to be president of a foreign country from his capital and so on, it sounds like we're getting to the territory of illegality. Is that necessarily immorality? Maybe not, but that does become less comfortable for me and more dubious.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, Trump has built up pretty good goodwill for me, and he's the president whose foreign policy I trust the most of any in my lifetime.
Yeah, it was. I heard from a friend who's in the DC circles, and I don't hear from him often, so I was surprised when he made this comment. But what he pointed out was that in previous presidential regimes, certain leaders of other nations have been killed by our special forces. I think he mentioned Hussein and Omar Gaddafi specifically. And so he was actually fairly impressed that Maduro and his wife were taken alive, and as far as we can tell from the pictures, unhurt substantially. And so his point was there should be a certain amount of grace given that the guy was captured and not killed. Uh, and I guess there'll be further questions of to what extent will the legal process that will then be invoked against him, what will that look like? But there's something to be said for the limited nature of both taking just him and also taking him alive. I guess there is the question of what else did they blow up on their way out, which I think, Tom, you mentioned there was destruction of several monuments inside Caracas, like the Hugo Chavez monument. So I guess we can get to that in a minute. Okay, so what we've covered thus far is, all right, some of the theories that touch upon any nation's, call it legal authority, to go into the borders of another nation and kill, or in this case, extract, and what they believe to be an enemy of their own self-interest. I want to jump now to, all right, what happens next to Maduro and presumably his wife?
Could I actually insert something before?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just worth setting the stage a little bit, running up to 2026 in terms of our foreign policy thinking on Latin America. And just the 10,000-foot view of the sort of prominent military doctrines. I already mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, with John Quincy Adams helping articulate that. In the 19th century, you've got the so-called Roosevelt Corollary, Theodore Roosevelt, 1904, adding a corollary to that, and then Trump claiming a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, or as it may now become known, the Don Roe Doctrine. So
Don Roe.
You have there's a shift here, but there's also continuity, and I mention this just to point out that we have acted towards Latin America, for better or for worse. It has become normal for the United States to act towards Latin America in certain ways for a very long time. And so the Monroe Doctrine asserted to European powers that you're not welcome to colonize or reclaim former colonies in the Western Hemisphere anymore. And we said,
as in, this belongs to our sphere of influence.
Well, not even
be advised.
In a sort of weak sense, yeah, that we don't want, it is contrary to our interest for you to recapture some former colony that has become independent, because this is in the decades after all these Latin American countries break away from Spain and Portugal. And you've still got some, right? Obviously, you've still got Cuba until the very end of the 19th century, a whole other story. And you've still got other small possessions in the Caribbean, but the Monroe Doctrine says European powers, we will treat it as hostile to our interest, maybe even an act of aggression against us, if a European power re-enters the Western Hemisphere to reclaim colonial possession or to create some new colony. For example, you could imagine, what if Spain went back and tried to reclaim Mexico? Something like this happened during the Civil War. We were kind of distracted when the French came into Mexico and installed an emperor there, and we didn't do anything about it because we had bigger fish to fry at that moment.
Right.
And other.
Right. That was Maximilian.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a tragic story.
So in addition to that, we said in the Monroe Doctrine, we say we are not going to interfere in any European colonial possessions that remain in the Western Hemisphere. And we are not going to meddle in Europe. Domestic affairs. So you leave our hemisphere alone, we'll leave your hemisphere alone, and also and we'll leave your possessions in our hemisphere alone. In the early 20th century, after actually some history with the British and Venezuela, because Venezuela is a debtor nation at that time and is reneging on its loans, and so European powers want to come and collect, and this happens during the Roosevelt administration. Roosevelt lays down in, I think, again, 1904, what he calls the Roosevelt Corollary. This is also the big stick language, speak softly but carry a big stick, and he adds on to the Monroe Doctrine that we, the United States, assert our our own international police power over the Western Hemisphere. We are going to act like the cops in this hemisphere when, under certain conditions, when certain nations have, I forget the phrase, it's something like persistent disorder internally that is affecting other nations. We can go in and we will go in and create order. And then we do this throughout the 19 teens and 20s. And we're in Haiti, and we're in the Dominican Republic, and we're in Nicaragua, and several other places. And just for better or for worse, that's part of the history from a century ago. The Trump corollary, which was articulated just a month or so ago in the National Security Statement, I think it was dated November 2025, it came out in December, adds on to that. And it says essentially that we are going to ensure that non-hemispheric powers are not acting in our hemisphere in a way detrimental to our interests. This is a kind of nuance. It seems to me like it's in continuity with, but nuancing the earlier doctrines by saying we're not just concerned about Chinese troops showing up in Venezuela. We're concerned about maybe Chinese companies, and we're concerned about funding. We're concerned about the drug trade and things like that. And it's still, I think the Trump corollary is still being defined, and maybe this event is going to be seminal in its definition. But it seems to be at least the Trump administration saying we're going to lean back into the Monroe Doctrine in some updated way to say this is our hemisphere, and we don't want any other powers to have military forces, considerable influence if they're hostile to us in this part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is basically a good idea. Everything I just referred to, and vaguely, I think maybe some of this stuff I'm less comfortable with than other parts, like acting like the policeman. It seems like we could just have our own version of Afghanistan and Iraq, in every little country in Central and South America. I don't want that. But certainly the desire to keep other major powers, and there's really China, and is that it? Like the only other major power in the world? Is it China? Is it China and Russia? I don't know. Brazil, I don't think really figures there, although they have their own little club that they do, BRICS, right? In terms of powers that could actually threaten us outside of our hemisphere, there's really just China, and saying that we're committed to keeping them away from our shores and away from our region, that seems to me prudent, especially when you're talking about in the Gulf of America and the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
That is quite close, as we all know, to our own shores. So that's just a little bit of background. I think is worth keeping in mind that there's this precedent going way back beyond 1989, right? This precedent of America declaring this is in some respect our hemisphere, not some foreign powers hemisphere. And is that a slippery slope that we've slid down between the 1820s and the 1920s? Maybe it is, and maybe this is just something we need to deal with. But that's part of our heritage. Maybe it's a worse part of our heritage, but there's some sanity in saying we want our sphere of influence. We want to keep hostile actors out of our backyard. How extensively do you define your backyard? Does that go all the way down to Argentina? Right. Does that go all the way up to Greenland? Right. These are all questions. And I'm not sure I'm going to be happy with all of the answers, but that's part of the background to all of this.
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. No, there's a lot of history there.
You were going to ask, though, about what happens next.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you mentioned as background, I do want to get to these higher level questions. I just think it's important to think clearly, although we don't have a crystal ball, nor do we have all the details. But I think it's important to clearly think through, okay, what happens next? You went and got this guy, and now in a certain way, you've sort of created this tension because he's not dead, right? So now you bring him to your shores. How do you treat him? I mean, you can't exactly give him a trial of his peers. We can't we can't go round up a bunch of other Latin American statesmen and say we need you to sit in on a.
Maybe we should just get the Venezuelan expat community. I'm not sure that would be a very friendly jury pool.
That would be that'd be
Maybe that would be
hilarious.
the most just thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. The Venezuelan expat community in New York is going to be the jury. You heard it here first, folks. Right. If that's adopted.
Could we move it to Miami?
Right.
Could we move the trial to Miami? That would
Yeah.
be better. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Yeah, so I want to get back to the questions of statecraft, but before I do that, how do you treat someone who's not a citizen of your country, who is not in the country when he presumably committed crimes for which you'd like to call him on the carpet? How do you even handle the treatment of such a figure?
We did it with Noriega.
Uh-huh.
We threw him in prison, and we did it with terrorists in the war on terror.
Mm-hmm.
Not entirely happy with Guantanamo Bay and the way that we handled that. It seems like if we actually believe these people are guilty, it's a strange situation to be in, where you're the world power, you're essentially waging war by any other name, and you have these foreign hostiles, and either they should be let go, or why weren't they killed? Or is there some process for executing all of these terrorists? There seem to be those dysfunctions in our legal system and maybe in our understanding of war and peace and execution and death and so on that paralyzed a lot of the judicial proceedings for war and terror suspects, terrorists. The fact that we have a very left-wing judiciary and lawyerly class doesn't help with that, but we had this very strange and not at all, to my mind, just system of just throwing them in Guantanamo Bay for indefinite periods of time. I'm not sure what a better solution would have been, but that doesn't seem like a great solution either.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I would just say I'm not sure, but it seems like we've been stuck in this dilemma before and for the last few decades and sort of at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And with someone like Noriega, we've done it before, 34 years ago at this point.
Right.
36 years ago. So there's some precedent there. That doesn't mean that it's the best system, or even that it doesn't mean that it's the best system. But I guess we have a system for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I think, is part and parcel of being a liberal world empire. We're not a particularly bloodthirsty world empire. We're not willing to be as bloodthirsty even as the Romans were.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the scale of slaughter enemies that you find in ancient warfare and empires is astounding, ought to be astounding to us, although modern technology is also very horrible in this respect. But we don't have the kind of mentality of just, we're gonna kill the enemy when we're done defeating them. And I'm not trying to endorse that. I'm just saying this is the dilemma when you're in age of rural humanitarianism, and extolling that kind of maybe mercy, maybe gentleness, whatever you want to call it. And yet you're also in this position of absolute dominant power where you could vaporize anyone at any moment if you wanted to, and you just happen to win the war, and then what do you do with these people that are captured or left over? The inability to resolve this situation, I think it's troubling to me. The inability to resolve these situations, that we get just these people left in limbo. And again, I'm not sure I have a good recommendation for what to do other than what we have done, but it's disconcerting.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. What can you do with Nicolas Maduro that serves both justice but does not upset the international order, right? Do you put him in house arrest somewhere?
Well, maybe I'll just say this.
Yeah.
To the extent that the international order exists, we maintain it, oppose it, maintain it, right? And
right.
The places where it doesn't exist is where we're not able or willing to oppose it. And so satisfying the international order is essentially like satisfying ourselves. I think we have conflicts within ourselves about what we want to do, but
Right.
I don't know how old he is. He's not that young and sprightly of a guy. So, if we throw him in prison for 30 years, and he'll probably die in prison, or maybe he'll be released, after some period of time and live a quiet life under, probably state protection so that some, enemy of his regime doesn't come and assassinate him. Like, I guess it seems like the point of what we've done is to eliminate him as an actor on the world stage. Done that, and I guess I'll be interested to follow the trial, assuming that a trial happens or whatever the proceeding is that happens after this, to see the details of what is he accused of, what is he actually guilty of, et cetera, to make up my mind on what I would prefer to have happen. But it seems like as a matter of our state policy, what we've wanted to do is just take that piece off the board, and we've done that. And
Yeah. Okay. So that's perfect. That's a great transition. So now if we pivot away from the specific figure, now we look back to Venezuela. What do you think the principles of responsible statecraft and responsible imperial administration would suggest for what one does in Venezuela over the next few months? Do you have strong thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess as a principle, I'd say, and this by principle I mean kind of articulate something that's just part of observed reality. We create, maybe earn the forms of government that we have. Different peoples create, earn something imposed from the outside has to be maintained from the outside. I think we did this relatively successfully in, again, Germany and Japan after World War II. Not saying I'm happy with all of the results of that, but
Sure.
it was done in an effective manner at rate, cost, and duration. And we're still both of those countries, right? And we're still operating them in some sense as, vassal protectorates that have been to some extent made over in our image. And that seemed just and legitimate and necessary at the time to the United States in the 1940s. And so we did it. I don't think we as a nation have the appetite, the capacity, the clarity of thought, the commitment to do that in Venezuela, nor would I want us to. Obviously, this whole conversation, like even raising that as a possibility, is getting ahead of ourselves because we took out one guy and everything else is still there. And of course, that makes a difference, and that's done something to destabilize the existing regime. But we actually want to destabilize the regime? How would it actually be better or worse for the Venezuelan people in the coming months or years if we just started shaking things a little bit more and saw what happened? I'm not at all confident that that's the case. I have no idea. And so I guess what I would say is first, I do not think we ought to pursue that full spectrum regime change.
Sure. Yeah.
Earlier. And I don't know about that secondary level of eliminate the ruling class. It's not clear to me that, from the little that I've read and studied recently about Venezuela, although it has much more of a legacy of democratic, competent self-governance than many other places in Latin America. It doesn't have a great history in the last few decades, and it doesn't have a great dynamic with extremist groups within its own borders and over neighboring countries' borders. It's not clear to me that the members of the regime who hold the levers of power and the money and have the guns in the country will go quietly. And so it seems most prudent to me. By prudent, I mean acting morally in pursuit of the right end, which is the interest of the American people primarily. It seems most prudent to me for our government to try to get whoever emerges currently, whoever is on top at any given moment in Venezuela, to work with us to our advantage. And I mentioned before we started recording, I have a good friend who is of Venezuelan extraction, and whose family fled during the Chavez era because it's not pleasant to live under a socialist government. And I know that he would like, not necessarily U.S. involvement in a deep way, but he would like us to help move things along so that the opposition takes power and Venezuelan civil society reemerges and they have a better chance at a decent way of life there. And I would like that to happen as well. It's not clear to me how we make that happen. It's not clear to me what the United States does or how far we ought to go in pursuing this. Something else we mentioned before we started recording was, there's this other big news story recently of massive fraudulent activities by Somalis in the United States. And, you go back a couple of weeks and you remember, there were some other great crises. And you go back a couple of weeks before that, there's some other great crises in America. Like, I would like the United States government to focus on those crises first and foremost. I fundamentally think that domestic policy has to be primary. And so when I start imagining what could we do, what should we do with Venezuela, I think this is important. Obviously, it's something that we need to do. It's something we have begun and we need to follow through in some appropriate way on. But our government will fundamentally be judged, hopefully by the people, certainly by God, and hopefully by history as well, on how they secured the blessings of liberty to us and our posterity. I would like them to ensure the general welfare, ensure national defense, ensure all of those goods laid out in the preamble to the Constitution for us. And so right. I guess what I'm saying is that once I start going down the rabbit hole in my mind of what could we do in Venezuela, I'm reminding myself, well, I'd actually like our government to do good things in America, and there's a lot of good things for them to do here, and that always has to be on the front burner, right?
Right.
Everything else has to be secondary, tertiary, et cetera.
Yeah. I admit my instinct is to say as little as one can do in a foreign country, one should do, right? One should do as little as possible as a general rule, especially since the more you try to do, the dramatic decrease in effectiveness you will have, because most people resent the actions of foreigners inside their own borders, right?
And I completely agree with that. And I would take that reasoning back, 25 years and say, if it were possible, I'm not sure if it was, but if it were possible, I think it would have been okay to, make the Taliban turn bin Laden over to us and leave the Taliban alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a consistent application of what you just said, and I believe that would have been a good thing if it were possible. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe they believe in hospitality too much to do that. I've read that about those early months in the war in Afghanistan. That's part of what happened, is that even though the Taliban knew that they would bring destruction upon themselves by not cooperating with us, they weren't going to betray a guest to a foreigner. And okay, there's something respectable about that, but I would like to follow that principle that you just articulated well. As little as possible, as little as necessary, because fundamentally we ought to get and keep our house in order.
Mm-hmm.
That is what is actually relevant to how we ought to judge our leaders, and what they do in foreign nations, what they do in foreign policy always has to be tied back to that. Now, there's a kind of dilemma here for presidents generally, including President Trump, which is that it's a lot easier to act as president in foreign affairs. Like, the nature of the office, there's much more expansive power, commander-in-chief, than as, guy in charge of taxes, right? Which is Congress's job, right? So, like, guy in charge of economy, which is always what we judge our president on, is like, how's the economy doing this month when I fill out my ballot. But that's the kind of thing that the president is indirectly responsible for. It can only indirectly act upon. So there's a temptation that many presidents understandably fall for, to turn to foreign affairs as a place where they can actually act with less constraint. And again, genuinely in their own hearts, do good and impressive and honorable things that are going to benefit their country, but they can actually act without as much constraint. And that has only increased in the last century as the president has become more independent of other branches. And then I guess I'd say it has subsequently decreased in part of the last century as at least elements of the presidency have been constrained by the military and the bureaucracy, so that they're able to do these actions when those elements of our government are happy with them. And something like withdrawing from Afghanistan, which Trump tried to do, and then Biden did in a very ineffective way, possibly due to his own fecklessness, possibly due to military not being happy with it happening. That kind of action of the commander in chief is not cannot be done in a very free and effective way. All of that to say, I should probably bracket that, because one of the things that's very impressive about this operation is that it happened, and that it happened so well, and that it happened without any leaks, and that Hegseth and Rubio at Department of War and Department of State were able to coordinate, and all the other agencies involved were able to coordinate and pull this thing off. I mean, this is an amazing show of not just our technical power and strength, but the competency of everyone, like at every level of these organizations, from the guys in the helicopters to like the guys in the control room to the guys in the ties, like, all the way back up at the command center, right?
Right. They did it well, and they kept their mouths shut.
And that's we haven't seen that in a long time. The SEAL Team 6 getting Osama bin Laden was extraordinary, and yet it happened after, and this isn't like to blame the SEALs or even Obama, but it happened after over a decade of bin Laden evading us. And this thing seems to have been, they were dry running it for several months. I understand they created, a simulation room that was based on, they had the CIA informant who told them all the specs of like the room they were going into, and they practiced it many times. And there was a lot of training and preparation for it, but it wasn't as if we set this goal and then couldn't accomplish it for 10 years. Right? I think the Trump administration set this goal pretty recently and got it done. And so that's a great sign of hope for, I think, the future of our country, at least during this presidential term, that we do have a great deal of competence in our military and in our government generally. And when we have people at the higher levels of command who actually want to use those tools to accomplish something good, they can accomplish it. Again, my only qualification to that is I don't quite see where this is going with this particular move. If it puts the fear of God in the Chinese, then maybe that's a good thing. If it gets adversarial powers away from our hemisphere, maybe that's certainly a good thing. It's again not crystal clear to me the precise importance of Maduro and how all the dominoes will fall as a result of this. But there's at least that confidence boost that maybe we've all needed since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That, gosh, we've got some really great people serving our country and putting their lives on the line and doing hard things for us.
No American casualties.
With 0 American casualties. Yeah, really incredible. 1 damaged helicopter.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. We got to 3 of the 18. Drugs, oil, also the way in which, if you have a nation with a corrupt system, right, one that makes room for cartel influence, shipping of illicit substances, the selling of oil contracts, like if you have a system that's messed up, okay, you've demonstrated this great restraint and you've taken out the current top guy. Well then, but the system is still in place. Is not the system itself the monster that you're trying to neutralize. So it seems to me that it would be very possible for someone else to come and replace the head leadership position and still keep certain corruptions in place because those corruptions are systemic. So I guess my question is, can do you see what is happening in Venezuela as the result of this particular personality, Nicolas Maduro, inheriting a system from Hugo Chavez? Or do you see him as basically just part of this system and we're going to have to be worrying about all the same problems going forward?
Yeah. Not entirely sure. Not, I just don't claim to be an expert in Venezuela to that. I do think that, again, a realistic and frankly moral approach to American leadership, by which I mean the leadership of America, not leadership in the world, but
yeah,
what the president ought to do is understand that he is not in the business of solving the world's problems, and he's not in the business of solving other people's problems. He's in the business of solving our problems to the extent that they can be solved, mitigating them to the extent that they can't be solved, mitigating the overflow of other nations' problems into our own nation to the extent that he can do that. And that becomes ambiguous and gray, and how far do you go? And this is a great example of just how ambiguous that could be, whether you're talking about Venezuela, or whether you're talking about the cartels in Mexico.
right.
It would be amazing if Mexico were as peaceful and orderly a society as Canada, right? It'd be really nice to have that kind of level of order and peace and prosperity on both sides of our borders, right? Instead of just to the north. That's not the case. That has never been the case, at least not for centuries. And it's not clear what the United States could do to make that the case. And so certainly our highest responsibility for our leaders is to prevent what disorder there is there, especially what intractable disorder there is there, from adversely affecting Americans.
Right.
So it's a matter of containing problems that are going to be there in one form or another in other nations, and containing them, keeping them away from us, and trying not to exacerbate them. And yeah, if there's an easy win in nudging the ball in the right direction in a foreign nation, then go for it.
Sure.
But that's always murky, right? And
right.
It seems, I guess, to get a little bit historical and maybe theoretical on us, you go back to the early American Puritans in Massachusetts, right? John Winthrop, and it's the city on a hill, right? The original meaning of the city on a hill in his sermon is that we will try to live an orderly and godly life, and in his original Puritan theological conception, that's actually not the greatest position to be in, because the city on the hill is like singled out for judgment by God, and so you're held to very high standards. But what
you really want a condo
in
the city on the hill?
Yeah, it's like Tevye says in Fiddler on the Roof, right? Like, God, I know it's a great privilege to be chosen by you, but couldn't you choose someone else once in a while, right? It's like it's a great burden to be the chosen. There's something like that in the early Puritan understanding of being the city on a hill. That becomes the idea, and this is what you find in people like John Quincy Adams and his foreign policy principles. That becomes the idea that, look, we're gonna set an example for the world, and if you want to follow it, more power to you. Go for it. Give it a try. We are going to try to live according to the principles of justice and the laws of nature and natural rights and all these things as we understand them. We're going to show for our own benefit that an orderly, Republican, self-governing nation is possible. This is what early America is trying to do. And we know people are looking at us. Great. If you want to take a leaf out of our book, give it a try, right? Give it a whirl in, Argentina or Brazil or France or wherever, right? It doesn't work out so well for France for a while, but give it a try. We're the city on the hill in that sense, not in the sense that somehow because we're the city on a hill, we're going to go down from the hill and make everyone else live on their own hill or
Drag everyone onto the nearest hilltop.
yeah, or onto ours, right?
Right.
Which is the great criticism of our policies of the last, century or half century of invade the world, invite the world, right? You sort of like go intervene all over the world and also have open borders. Like that's a terrible policy, and we're seeing the fruits of that in places like New York City in the recent mayoral election, right? Like import the third world and then have them vote, and after you've spent a great deal of time, provoking them in how we conduct our foreign policy, and so they're going to elect this anti-American, socialist, and that's not great for anyone. Certainly not for the people of New York. So I guess I would say that the keeping that earlier notion of what the city on the hill was meant to be, that we can be something like a secularized version of the light to the nations, right? We can exemplify to other nations, here's a good way of running your nation. It's working out for us. See if it works for you if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Learn from us if you want to. Take us as an example. But this is our own project. This is our own history. This is our own destiny that we're working out, and we're doing our best. And we're concerned with, as the shepherds set over our flock ought to be concerned with the good of their own flock. Like husbands ought to be concerned with securing and advancing the American interest. And if anyone else in the world is inspired by that, take from it what you will. You're going to have to adjust to local conditions, right? You're going to have to adapt this in a prudent way to yourself. Great, you're welcome to do so. Welcome to copy us as much as you want, not stealing our technology and so on and so forth. But you're welcome to copy us and emulate us if you are interested in doing so. And if you're not, that's great. Do your own thing. That's actually not our business.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that I was following the story, but not as closely as I might have, that there's a certain amount of drug traffic from Venezuela that exceeds traffic from, I don't know, Colombia, or any other nation? I mean, do we have the receipts, so to speak, that Venezuela under Maduro was a font for very identifiable problems in the U.S.? I'm not opposed to the idea that that is the case, but it just makes me, I am curious that we're not picking on, say, Colombia in a similar way for cocaine production.
Well, interesting you mention that because Trump told Colombia, he said, watch out, because you could be next.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
my understanding is that Venezuela is not the great source of fentanyl coming into the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a big source of cocaine coming to the United States.
Sure.
I think J.D. Vance addressed this very recently, earlier today or yesterday, saying like, "Hey, cocaine's bad too," which is fair enough. In response to the criticism that we're not going after the source of fentanyl, which is the great crisis that you said you were going to solve. As I understand it, again, without a sort of detailed understanding of what's in the papers for arraigning Maduro, is that there's some large element of that drug trade and trafficking that was coming from Venezuela, and that this is a good in itself to stop that, and also a pretext for accomplishing other goals, right? If you happen to be running drugs, pushing drugs from your country into our country, and you love the Chinese and the Iranians, and you're sponsoring all kinds of horrible acts of terrorism, and you're a base for our foreign adversaries and so on, then so much the better that we sort of take you and your drugs and all the other stuff out. maybe Maduro is high on this list of priorities because of that overlap of all of those different reasons and because of the precarity of the situation and so on, that it made sense in Trump's judgment to go after him. I don't, however, think that even though that's the legal basis for bringing him to trial, again, setting aside the question of is it legal to extract him and so on, I don't think that's the only motive for him. It's like how you break up the mob. You indict Al Capone on tax fraud, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, it's bad that you committed tax fraud, but that's not really why we're going after you.
Right.
But it's helpful for our cause to take your piece off the board.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it's something like that, where yes, it's great to get someone who is pushing cocaine to the country, but we singled out Maduro because of a whole bevy of other concerns.
Sure.
In addition to that one.
Right. Him harboring the actors right, either the proxies or the agents of other foreign powers is probably more of a concern.
And maybe just to take the Trump administration at its word with a little bit more wider time frame than just the last 48 hours. When Trump said he wants to make America great again. And then when the Trump administration said a couple of months ago that it wants to update the Monroe Doctrine and reinstate that, those all seem to be the great background to what's happening here. That the specific charge against Maduro ought to be fit into. Again, we'll see whether this is actually the case or not, but Trump thinks that doing this is conducive to the American interest. And it does seem to be pretty clearly a case of reordering the Western Hemisphere to be more American friendly. And I think I guess I would fit this action into those two categories and say, yeah, if I imagine I'm willing to take them at their word that that's what they're doing. In addition to the fact that they think he's guilty of X, Y, and Z, and that's what they're going to bring to trial on. The deepest reason for doing so is because Trump thinks this is going to serve the national interest.
Right.
It's not because he actually conceives his highest calling as being the DEA agent for the Western Hemisphere. That the war on drugs is something that we're seriously conducting right now. That he's interested in bringing every drug trafficker to trial. No, let's bring this drug trafficker president to trial because he's done a lot of awful things for us, and this will be good for us.
Right. What do you think? How do you figure Venezuela's oil reserves into this picture?
It's my understanding. So first of all, they've got enormous oil reserves. Obviously, that's a part of it. Secondly, Trump is famous or infamous for saying regarding the Iraq war, like, we should have just taken their oil. Right? He's on record saying that from like 20 years ago. So thirdly, I've seen a lot of commentary saying, they say it's about drugs, but it's actually about the oil. And it's like, no, actually, Trump just said it's about the oil. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to say, so why does Trump think it's legitimate to go after Venezuela? Oil?
Right.
So
it's not really a gotcha moment.
Like,
Like,
gotcha.
hey, gotcha.
And it's like, no,
He said it's about the oil. Yeah.
I did see a liberal commentator saying they said it was about the drugs, but it's actually about the oil and the regime change. It's like, no, he said, like, we're doing regime change to get their oil. Like, argue with him on that terrain. That's like fine for you to disagree with him, say that that's illegitimate in some way, but that is the claim. So as I understand the history, it goes back. So first, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry a couple of times. The most recent history is during the rule of Hugo Chavez, and as I understand, so there had been nationalization, I think, in the 70s, and then again, I think in the early 2000s, 2010s, but I think it's the 2000s, and or maybe the 90s. No, 2000s, because Chavez comes in 99. And so, as I understand it, there was a sort of a mixed bag on whether U.S. oil companies, were properly compensated for that nationalization under Chavez. As I understand it, it's sort of case-by-case basis. Some of them absolutely were not. And that's just sort of commonly recognized. And so I take it that that's part of what Trump's referring to, or that is what Trump's referring to when he said they took our they took our oil
Mm-hmm.
in their own country. Um, and so there's a claim about justice there. There's a claim about just recompense there, that American companies went and invested capital in a foreign nation after that nation having already had a mixed track record of respecting private business and upholding contracts and so on. And they invested in them. This is after a socialist comes to power and then starts to bankrupt his country. He, seizes the assets, the infrastructure of American oil companies in his nation so that he can fund himself, I guess his supporters to some extent, certainly his regime clique. And so there's a justice claim there. And, that ought to be repaid if we're pursuing justice. However, Trump's obviously claiming something much beyond that. Trump wants Venezuela to be a productive oil extracting country.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand it, there's a lot of heavy crude oil there that needs to be refined. And there's a lot of refineries just 1,000 miles north, or however far it is, in Louisiana and Texas. So maybe this is going to be mutually beneficial to everyone.
Right. That was the point that someone made specifically, is that the oil that Venezuela specifically has is not found everywhere, but it is also a type of oil that we are specifically set up to refine. And so there's a fit there, and we're not going to get it from Russia.
Yeah, which if you want, it's good to mention Russia here, right? Because maybe the double, triple bank shot that Trump is, shooting right now is actually about weakening Russia and taking Russia further off the world stage by reducing our dependence, reducing the price of oil worldwide, and so on and so forth, right? You open up oil reserves that have been inefficiently managed or in a corrupt regime or just not exploited for a variety of reasons, and you lower the price of oil internationally. That's good for the American consumer. That's bad for oil powers, including Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to Venezuela in particular, look, if you've been ruled by a military oligarchy that with socialist characteristics, which is what Venezuela has been for several decades now, the vast natural resources you have not been serving society as a whole that you live in, Venezuelans. And so if Trump pressures the new rulers of Venezuela into exploiting their oil resources more effectively, exporting them, getting paid in a just way, whoever's involved in this process, and then they wind up in American refineries and they refine the oil, and that's good for American workers, and that's good for our consumers and our economy. Maybe that's actually simply better for everyone involved, except the oligarchs in Venezuela. Like maybe it benefits more people in Venezuelan society. Maybe it benefits like the structure of Venezuelan society by having competent, less corrupt businesses there. And who knows if that's actually going to pan out that way, but this is maybe the idea. Benefits us and our people as well. If this is a way of benefiting the United States and Venezuelan society, then so much the better. I guess saying it's a war for oil sounds really horrible. It sounds like you're killing or possibly dying for oil, and this is the great polemic against Bush and the Iraq war, blood for oil. I saw some protesters today in our own town holding a "No Blood for Oil" sign. Just imagine, was that in your closet for 20 years after the Iraq war? It's great that you busted that out again.
I knew we were saving this.
Yeah, we saved
I'm
it.
so glad we left it up in the attic.
Exactly.
We need it today.
Yeah. So I guess that doesn't seem to me to be the most immediately noble, praiseworthy, just cause for going to war, like cheaper oil. But this is something that makes a tremendous difference in people's lives, including the lives of the people in the country from which the oil is being extracted. And that be done in a way that will benefit them, that'd be nice. That'd be nice if that was a side effect of this. I think Trump, though, is holistically thinking about this intervention, whatever you want to call it, as related to advancing America's interests. So he imagines if we're able to get more oil flowing from Venezuela and it comes to us instead of to some hostile power, and if it's lining the pockets of people at least potentially friendly to us instead of people manifestly hostile to us. And if it's directly benefiting us as well, then great, so much the better. That's a net win for the American leadership. All of those things follow from this. So I have no idea if that's how the oil angle is going to work out, but I'm guessing that's the rationale, is that this is part of a package of benefiting America, remove an enemy and increase things that benefit us.
Right. Does it bother you if allies of a particular political figure benefit financially from the actions of that political figure, which some people would call cronyism, which obviously is a loaded term? On the other hand, is it specifically wrong if allies of yours take advantage of opportunities that you create? Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are. Obviously, entire political epochs have been defined by get your guy in, and then your guy takes care of you and your friends, which always seems corrupt
Yes.
to me.
Yeah. I would prefer to live in a nation where people are able to prosper, provide for themselves, their families, their communities, without some angle that is contingent on the current administration in power. Like, that would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
that would be my ideal that I'd like to get back to. In order to get there, there's probably a lot of changes that would have to happen in terms of deregulation and shrinking the government, because just the sheer scope of our governmental apparatus means that every aspect of society is touched by government in a really intimate way. And so I guess there's a narrow way of reading your question and a broad way of reading it. I'm reading it broadly. I mean, narrowly, yeah. If this guy's best friend, goes into oil extraction in Venezuela, tomorrow, when the stock exchange opens, he moves all these things in, and then that looks kind of dirty to me. Although I don't know, but I would prefer for that not to be the case. On the other hand, it seems like entire swaths of the economic sector and society are influenced by whether your government is favoring one industry or another. So at the sort of macro level, when you have Democrats in power, it's good for social workers, right? It's like fund social services to a greater extent than Republicans do. And so you could see sort of systemically that people who are in certain lines of work are just, benefiting from the cronyism of one party rather than another. Maybe you could say the converse for energy, non-renewable energy for Republicans or renewable energy for Democrats. So at a sort of broad level, there's that kind of involvement. And to some extent, that's always the case, right? If you pass, the Moral Act in 1860, whatever, and you open up the West for settlement, then, Lincoln and the Republicans are benefiting farmers. Like, right, they're enabling farmers to go and farm. It's like, but that seems like a good thing. So it does seem like government is always, to some extent or another, creating the parameters for certain economic incentives to exist or not exist. Certainly, the more immediate and closer it gets to these individuals, the more uncomfortable I feel. And
Sure.
And there, it just seems like the way to avoid that is shrinking government, not some kind of tiny government absolutist, but that's the way to reduce the chances of that kind of proximity to power financially.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah, I remember getting a little heartburn when the involvement and benefit to Halliburton in the Iraq project was revealed. Oh boy, man, Cheney really ushered them to the front of the line, it would seem, in order to fulfill the various government contracts that were required for state building.
Yeah. So it would, I guess, another angle for coming at this, and we were, talking off air a little bit more about the Somali fraud situation. It's just worth.
I'm actually not super familiar with that. Can you guys run me through that real quick?
Sure. This has been going on in multiple ways, but the state of Minnesota has been sort of a center of this. And one of the first big scandals that came to light very prominently middle of last year was wide-scale fraud perpetrated largely by Somalians in Minnesota in defrauding state-level programs for like, food assistance. There's the big trial, and it's something like 40 or 50 defendants who are on trial for this, is with an organization called Feed Our Families. And I think it was a COVID-era program that had very loose regulation and that was massively exploited, and the overwhelming majority of the defendants are Somalian. And then more recently, there has been
Basically claiming a certain number of dependents,
yeah,
for example.
fraudulently
Okay.
and defrauding the state to insane numbers. More recently, there have been investigative journalists who have exposed widespread fraudulent use of daycare funding programs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these investigative journalists going around with cameras and going from one daycare center to another, run by Somalians, and there are no kids there, or like the employee doesn't know anything about the daycare, and it seems like there's a great deal of fraud there, and the Trump administration has started to investigate this, and this is actually, as these stories have come out and broken into the mainstream media, people have pointed out, there were these local attempts at reporting on this stuff from like 10 years ago, that this seems to have actually been a very long-standing issue in the Somalian population in certain states, and Minnesota seems to be the hotbed of it, where you have this extremely generous social welfare program because a bunch of Scandinavians settled Minnesota, and like that's what they do is like social democracy, socialist democracy, and the Somalian population in particular seems just shameless about exploiting that and defrauding the state. Again, it's to the tune of billions of dollars that they've been accused of at this point, and it seems like there's good documentation going back a decade at least that local journalists, local politicians, local figures were very uncomfortable pursuing this precisely because of the racial angle and the demographic angle that you have people coming out and starting to advocate for this, and it gets quashed or it gets pushed to the side. And there's obviously this accelerates after 2020, but even before that, there's this sense that Americans are afraid of being accused of being racist or xenophobic or anti-Somalian in particular if they start to call out this behavior, which seems to be perpetrated on a very wide scale in this population. So I mentioned all of that. Why do I mention all of that? I mentioned all of that as a recent example of the amount of dysfunction and fraud and corruption that just occurs within America domestically, and in the case I just mentioned is very associated with the Democratic Party, because there also seems to be great evidence of Somali community leaders essentially exchanging votes for
Favors.
And this is a tale as old as time, and this is certainly the way to manipulate a mass democracy. If you sort of take a welfare state and you have a democracy, and then you want to stay in power as a politician, you just allow people to exploit the welfare system, or you continue to build the welfare system so that they trade their votes for
benefits.
Their money for their votes for money and benefits. So I mentioned all of that as a particularly timely and extreme example of the amount of corruption that actually just does exist in our country and that benefits the left. And I'm not here to say that there's no, corruption benefiting the right, but we should be frank about the amount of, virtue lost and self-sufficiency and rugged individualism lost and disappeared from our society and our system, and about just how shameless the left seems to be in exploiting these things to their benefit and in using every rhetorical and legal and other tool at their disposal to, crush anyone who tries to point it out or bring them to account. I'm not trying to exonerate conservatives or Republicans or the business community or anything else from their own corruption in different ways. I do, however, I would make this distinction. If an industry that is being favored is a productive industry, then I'd rather see it be favored than an unproductive industry. So if an industry actually creates real value and is going to materially benefit the lives of the people involved and the wider society, I'd rather have government doing something to promote that, and not in this cronyistic way, but do something to promote that than the kind of promotion of financial markets that seem to be just fake, not actually tied to the production of any value for anyone, not making a difference in any hard and fast and real way in anyone's life,
right,
but just running up numbers that benefit a few people who trade with numbers on a computer screen. So I would like our economics to be more grounded in reality, in the real world.
Yeah.
In making the land fruitful, in making people healthy, in preparing people for a life of virtue and happiness. And so much of our economy seems directed in other directions, sometimes actually against that. And then if there is fraud attached to the things going in an anti-human direction anyways, then I'd want to come down all the harder on stuff.
Yeah, I think Michael Lewis puts it well when he says that the job of Wall Street is to allocate capital, right? There does need to be some industry around a group of people who think about what business ventures are worth investing in and giving investors the proper channels to invest in those industries, right? That is a needed part of our economy.
Service. Yeah.
We've allocated it. We've delegated that to Wall Street and its clones across different trading platforms in our country. But what seems to have been very clear in the aftermath of 2008, but is probably still very true today, is that basically there grew up this speculative and frankly gambling element within that Wall Street machine, right? That speculation and gambling became a way to make massive amounts of money for yourself or your firm, rather than in the prudent allocation of capital to productive businesses wherever they may be.
And we see this just in terms of where the cream of the crop coming out of the Ivy League institutions go, right? They get recruited to Wall Street or to Silicon Valley, right? That's pretty much where the top percentage GPA people from the most renowned universities go. And I don't have a great deal of confidence in what either of those sectors are doing. Right? It's sort of Silicon Valley has spent so much the last couple of decades just making devices that addict us and reduce our quality of life and sort of substitute a fake reality for real reality, because real reality isn't getting that much better in the way that the dreams of the technological future led us to believe. And then Wall Street, so much of it is that kind of speculation that's not actually producing something of value. And so it would be nice. I don't have the lever to pull to make this happen, but it would be nice for our most elite individuals to be going into inventing real things that improve the lives of their fellow citizens, or running organizations more competently that serve the good of their communities. And for the most part, they seem to be gravitating into very different sectors
That are basically only self-referential when it comes to the question of benefit.
And I mean the conjunction of those of the tech and the gambling, right? It's like the gambling apps, which are then
Oh goodness.
given to just the ordinary Americans, so that they can just sit and degrade themselves and their lives and go massively
Their finances.
debt. And it's just it's disgusting. It's
Yeah.
pathetic, it's sad, and it's horrible.
My brother tracks this industry pretty closely, and he says the ability of the gambling apps to specifically invite you into the activity is particularly nefarious because they can tie into all the other behavior tracking behavior tracking technologies already have, right? So a casino has a billboard on the side of the highway that you might see when you drive by on your way home from work. Then you still got to go home, have dinner, deal with your wife and your kids, and then maybe you get back out of the casino. But a gambling app can reach you when everyone else has gone to bed and you're feeling lonely and at a dead end, and all of a sudden you get a pop-up that says, hey, 1 hour special, 2x returns on every successful bet, right? So these apps can be particularly pointed at your particular weak points in your day, in your energy cycle, in your sleep cycle, right? I mean, it can start to figure out to ping you at 3 a.m. because that's when you get up and go to the refrigerator looking for a late night snack. I mean, their ability to touch your personal life is unprecedented in history.
It sounds in multiple ways. That sounds like pornography for man's productive element.
Right.
Like you ought to actually be using this like element of yourself of like engaging with something else and risk taking and all this in like building something, in serving someone else in some line of work and something like that. And instead it's this like purely fake contraceptive version of that activity, just analogously to pornography. It's just what wasted potential for people who get sucked into that. And I just have great pity for those people. I don't have like contact with the gambling apps in particular, but one of my jobs when I was just younger was I worked in a liquor store.
Mm-hmm.
I saw there, the effect of, and this was like a high-end liquor store, so we were selling like really nice wines and stuff to very wealthy people who worked at a very prestigious university and other people in the city. But I just got to see and know the people who were in there who were obviously very high-functioning alcoholics and who were obviously very high-functioning gambling addicts, because there were also like scratch cards and things that you could buy in there. And the people at the bottom end of the spectrum for that who would come in and buy like the little bottles, little shooters.
The little shooters of Fireball.
Yeah, who like barely had enough money to like buy that, and who also acted the same way towards the gambling. And it's disgusting. It's really sad. It's not to say that that alcohol per se is evil or something like that, or even that gambling with some friends is the worst thing in the world. Though I'm actually just not interested in that, and I never have been. But I feel this great like pity and compassion for those people that it seems like such a waste. And what is it for? It's for nothing. And I guess it would be nice if maybe I'm hoping for something that's not as strong as I should be. I was about to say it'd be nice if we looked at that socially with the kind of regard that we look at pornography. I'm not sure we as a society look at that with sufficient disregard anymore. We ought to look at that kind of gambling, same contempt or pity or whatever it is.
Right. Well, so that strikes on something that my brother was mentioning, which I really think needs to see the light of day, which is gambling is one of the rare addictions in which the activity itself potentially solves the problem, right? So if your drinking is out of control, if your addiction to pornography is out of control, indulgence in the habit will probably not solve the collateral damage that the habit is causing. But a gambler can tell themselves that indulgence in the habit could potentially solve the collateral damage. Because if I hit big, then I can pay off all my debts, right? And then my wife won't divorce me, and I won't lose my job and my house.
So that makes it worse. Is that what you're saying? That makes it worse than alcohol?
It makes it uniquely pernicious to rationalization. Yeah. Because there is a chance.
That's very difficult. And again, this is why I say pity. I understand. This is not advice that I struggle with.
Right.
Gambling. I just never been interested in that. But that sounds really difficult. But I don't see how you get out of that.
You get out of it with one more roll, baby.
Exactly.
One more roll. Yeah.
Yeah.
That second mortgage placed in cash on 33 red.
So I hope this is not Trump's approach to foreign policy.
Sure.
Right? That if he's warning like Colombia, you could be next, and you could be next. I hope Trump does not have this mentality. I don't have reason to believe that he does.
Right.
And obviously the analogy breaks down pretty quickly that
Sure.
not like if I just coup one more foreign leader, then all the other problems will be solved. But that kind of mentality just seems so, such a difficult trap to break out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Uh, and especially when, right, not only the addiction habit in your own biology and in your own spirit, but also the industry itself is designed to pull you back in. Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to track different addictions to see what potential virtue they're a corruption of.
Mhm.
So it seems sort of an easy, okay, so porn or other forms of sexual excess are a corruption of, a corruption of erotic love or just interpersonal connection, right? But it'd be interesting to think of gambling as a corruption of the virtue of prudence, right? And judgment, right? Like looking at all the factors, weighing all the different odds, I think the Red Sox are going to win this one, right? I mean, there's a certain judgment
Sure.
that you're exercising there. And apparently some people can do it pretty
Yes.
well.
Yeah. That makes sense. I can master the stats relevant to this,
Mm-hmm.
or there's this other kind of version of the corruption of prudence of like I have the right vibe on
Yeah.
this roll or whatever,
Right,
whatever
right.
it is. Like the vibes are right for this hand, and certainly different games. Right, there are games of chance, games of skill, and this huge spectrum,
Mhm.
mixture of how much skill is involved, how much chance is involved. But yeah, I could see that corruption of prudence manifesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There are certainly some games where you're just pulling the lever, but
That might help us. This is an interesting line of thought. If we could determine which addiction is a corruption of which virtue, and then if we accept it as dogmatic truth that the corruption of the best is the worst, then all we'd have to do is say, well, what's the best virtue? And then we would find what is the worst addiction.
sure.
Because it would be the corruption of the worst, the corruption of the best virtue.
Right.
And there, I don't know, you want to talk about prudence, you want to talk maybe about theoretical wisdom.
Sure.
It's going to be relevant to any addictions. That would be an interesting way of what is worse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder if you could, maybe the starting point to figure that out would be finding the one thing people like to do the least of, but is the best for them, which is usually mental work. And so, like, people would rather go through a physical problem than it would be to do a math problem, for example. Dr. Grove mentioned this one time in oration. I was like, that's really interesting. And he was like, why do people rather have physical suffering than mental suffering?
Uh-huh.
And I think it's because mental aptitude is a higher faculty. So you have to use more of yourself. You have to give more of yourself into the work in order to receive something back. And so, like, maybe that's why phones, for example, are so addictive, because it feels like you're doing something with your mind.
Yeah.
But in reality, you're just feeding it with noise.
That's good. And yeah,
I don't know.
going on that thread, mental faculties involved either in pursuing knowledge or pursuing connection, friendship. Actually, social media is a kind of overlap of those two.
Mm-hmm.
It might not always be the highest form of knowledge, but like the news feed, and whether it's your friends posting things on Facebook or Instagram, or whether it's the Twitter feed of the news happening, or whether it's something else. It's a kind of access to information that is only appealing to us because we're rational. It's not appealing to a dog or a raccoon or something like that, but
Yeah.
it's appealing to us because we're rational animals. So we want to have information input, and we want to seek out information, and that's good. That's actually a good thing about our nature. And then you couple that together with connection with other people, whether it's my friend posting his life update, or it's this journalist posting this bit of information. Social media feeds, especially X, formerly known as Twitter, they have such like a personality element to them, and that this is certainly something that I spend too much time on. I'm sorry to say. But you have a sense of like the personalities of different commentators and journalists and figures and so on. So you're not just following the news. You're in the social media era. You're following these personalities commenting on the news or making and breaking news.
Right.
That,
Right. People will say, I like this guy. I like this
Exactly.
podcaster. I like this commentator. This is the way they say that I like my friends.
Yeah,
We use the same word, at least in English.
and we are rational and social creatures, right? Those are baked into our, and we're free and embodied and all of these other things. But that those two very high callings of the human person to reason and to communion. And we could actually say like this goes all the way up, right? This goes all the way up to like our desire for communion with God, our destiny and communion with God. God is himself the logos, and so it's like it's also reason, right? It's like contemplative vision of the beatific vision. That's the perfection of like reasoning, or rather beholding, like in an intellectual sense, and being in communion with. We have that like perfection only in the beatific vision, and we seek approximations of that. Some of them good, some of them very bad in this life. We seek versions of that, and so yeah, maybe the social media / news feed, it's tapping into both of those desires. See that becoming very corrupt. I guess if we're actually following this principle of the corruption of the best and the worst, we would then want to say, well, don't we more recoil from like the porn addict than from the news junkie? Maybe that's for good reason, right?
Yeah.
Would we really want to? And then maybe we'd have to say, well, is that because our premise that the corruption of the best and the worst is wrong, or is that because our premise that reason and communion are higher than eros is wrong? Like maybe erotic communion is actually that's the Platonic way of thinking about communion. Even philosophy is you want to be united with the people, and that comes out in perverse ways in lust, just like for someone else's body. It comes out in better ways in like higher forms of human love, and it comes out in the best possible way in your desire to be united with the objects of knowledge. Like philosophy itself is this erotic pursuit, and there's at least a part of the Christian tradition that doubles down on that erotic element. The dominant one, the more Platonic and Augustinian rather than the Aristotelian and Thomistic version of Christianity, but it's there, and it's in the Song of Songs, right? It's like all over the place actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be done with that. So maybe we should keep that in mind as well as we're thinking about corruptions of the best being the worst, and which addiction we're actually saying is worse. So, yeah, we're following the news.
Well, I wonder, I've had this thought for a little bit. It seems like a lot of addictive behaviors are all, well, actually, I listened to an interesting podcast the other day with a very hedonistic guy, and he's like, we're trying to get out of it. He was like the guy who like had all of it, like harems, essentially.
Do you think your listening to the podcast was worse than what he? No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Interesting.
The podcast that he listened to that day. No.
Yeah, that's a good question. But he
Is this the Dan Bilzerian
Bilzerian guy?
Bilzerian.
And so he was saying that it's like you have all these empty black holes. It's like no matter how much you fill them, you can never fill them up. He said he only realized by giving himself he found fulfillment. And I was like, and he's like, started thinking about, he was like, the hardest thing I ever did was write a book. But it's like, these other things that people say is way harder to get all these people interested in me would be harder. And he realized, no, it's just, he just figured out a method. And then he went on further to say that by discovering all his addictions and starting to get out of them, now he's finding God too. And it's interesting because it seems that the way God made us as cooperators in life, he essentially wants us to play a game that he plays. And so God created the world, this place, this paradise, and which is etymology of paradise means walled garden. And so he wanted us to play in this creation and be a gardener, make life come about. And so we are essentially mimicking what he does in full reality, which also works into a lot of what theological writers and philosophical writers say as well. But maybe that's why we find so much fulfillment and good things that we enjoy doing, like our hobbies and things, because we're approximating a playful gesture to what God is doing. And so maybe that's like the story God's trying to invite us into, saying, I played, I made this world for you to live in. Now it's your turn to play and give back to me. And those that do, we revere and admire, and those who don't, we find shameful. Because the people that try to take, like tyrants, they try to just take everything for themselves. I like those little bully kids that we just can't stand. But the kids we want to play with are the ones that share what they have and give us a turn. So I just been thinking maybe God wants us to play better games.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I don't know.
Play better games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what really brought this all about was in the end of the Hunger Games, when Katniss is sitting there with her baby and her daughter. I think she has 2 or 3 kids at that point.
I haven't seen or read these, so
Oh, you haven't seen
I'm
it?
not sorry. I know the name.
think-
That's it. Yeah.
I think the Hunger Games might be my favorite movie series.
Oh, really?
They're very good.
Huh.
It's so interesting. But at the end of the thing, she essentially tells her daughter, because she was asking, "What did you do, Mom?" She said, "Well, I fought a lot of bad guys. And there's this thing called the Hunger Games. I just had to fight for my life." And then she's holding her baby and she said, "This is a better game." And that's the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
That's good. Yeah.
Wow, this is a better game. But the word is important, that it is a form of play.
it's a fun.
Yeah. There's a lot of thoughts coming together.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No. But I really think, okay, so that playful attitude, being able to engage in play, that's a very helpful way of putting it. And it's not the way we normally think of play, because we normally think of play as like, play is something for children or it's frivolous. But
Yeah.
the way you were framing it, it's like, no, it's this kind of generous receptivity and giving towards others and towards the world. And it what does it require? It seems like it actually games require rules, right?
Yeah.
And that's not always what we think of when we think of playful. We can think of like transgressing rules and bending things and so on and so forth. And that might be part of it as well. Like the improvisation that you can have, boundaries is also fun and part of play. But
The boundaries create the creativity.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that attitude and talking about the bully kid being like a tyrant as opposed to others who are presumably like operating by the rules, whether it's unspoken rules or like really formalized rules, and you're able to have fun with them, whether that's in competition or cooperation or whatever the game in question is. And that's the condition of peace, it seems to me. Like that is a peaceful situation. That is what you do in peace. And that I mean that to include even competition. Like you can be at peace when you're playing basketball against other people. You know they're going to follow the rules. Like they might push them sometimes, but like they're of goodwill, they're your friends, and you can compete against them, and like that's fun, right? And if they were not in competition with you, it wouldn't be fun. But if they were in competition with you so much so that they would disregard the rules, that would not be fun either, right? In a different way.
Yeah.
And so that kind of peace, right? St. Augustine calls peace the tranquility of order. And St. Augustine says in the City of God that peace is what every creature desires. We all desire it in different ways. And he says, like, peace is what, the grumbling belly desires. Like the very basic piece of like, stop grumbling, like give me food so I stop grumbling. There's a kind of return to order that happens when your belly is filled. And it goes all the way up the chain to the most profound sorts of peace possible. And it seems like that's also not to force the connection back to our earlier conversation, but that ought to be the goal of statesmen, right?
Yeah.
Is peace, right? You wage war for the sake of victory, and you turn, and that's the job of the warrior. That's the job of the general ultimately. But that pursuit is subordinate to a higher pursuit of statesmanship. Statesmanship is supposed to direct war and the victory that can come from war fundamentally towards peace. And it gets complicated because you could have a flawed notion of what peace is, right? And we want our peace and they want their peace, and we prefer our peace to their peace, right? Like Hitler has a different idea of peace than Stalin does, than Churchill does, than American, et cetera, right? And so you have to be clear about what true peace is, and this winds up running back down to the individual human person, like what is a human good for? What is a human? What is good for a human, and so on. And that redounds back to the social level, but creating the conditions in which people can play, maybe that's actually a way of saying what statesmanship ought to aim at. It's like not what I would have thought of coming into the conversation, but like, yeah, you're supposed to create justice and prosperity and ultimately peace and like all the things constitutive of peace and conducive to it. But if peace is the condition in which you're able to play, and also if play is the thing that you do when you're at peace, it's not like backbreaking labor, and it's not an act of desperation, but it's something you're able to do in leisure.
But also effortful.
But also,
right. Yeah. Right. But that doesn't mean you create a society without rules, right? In fact, rules are part of the game. It's not just about getting the ball in the net.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a nice passage in Hesiod, the great epic poet from Homer, roughly Homer's time, right? Hesiod writes the Theogony, which is about the generations of the gods, and then he writes a work called Works and Days, where he's basically telling his good-for-nothing brother to like be a good person and work harder. It's awesome. It's really good reading. But one of the things he says is that there are two kinds of strife. The gods created two kinds of strife. There's the violent strife. There's the strife that leads to violence and injustice. Every man hates that strife. And then there's this strife of basically virtuous competition. That's a gift from the gods to man. And that's the desire to surpass your neighbor and do a better job. He says, like, it turns potter against potter. Like, you want to create the best pottery. And this is how we get really good pottery, is through the competition of the good strife. And so I guess that doesn't, when you say strife, it sounds like the opposite of peace. But I think maybe the bad form of strife is, and then the good form is actually a part of it. It's like part of what you do when you're at peace.
Totally. And this might be something to think about. I just finished Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning book. I don't know if you are familiar. It was his first work. It was him trying to grapple with the problem of why can people be genuinely evil. So he was essentially going through Viktor Frankl, Solzhenitsyn, old mythic stories, like all those old stories that survive through history, and trying to interpret what is going on here. Really brilliant. But he comes to the conclusion that morality begins with play. Play is the axiom for morality, because if you have a game that people want to play, it's rules that will benefit everyone in the game. Yeah. And then he went a little bit and talk about that strife thing. He said, when you're playing like as an adult, you don't want to play against like the 8th grader. You can't really play the game well, because he said you don't want an assured victory, because that won't demand the most from you. Yeah. So it won't be a place for growth for yourself if you can just win every time. But you also don't want to be crushed by a competition that's so good you have no hope of challenging. And he said that's like the beginning point of even marriage. He said like marriage is like he said the bringing of each other towards a higher end. Because he said his example was saying like if you're trying to have perfect control over your hands, he says put the opposing hand on in perfect control. So it's like you're both going for the same goal, but Yeah, it's built upon the consent of playing a game you both see with. And I was like, oh, I've never heard it play this way. Because I was like, it's like frivolous. You don't play for, you should work, you know,
Yep.
responsible people work. And then you realize life gets so dull and so meaningless if you don't have fun.
Mm.
And then you realize, I'm just a robot. I'm just following protocols. Do this then, do this now. And there's no place for creativity.
Huh.
Very
Interesting.
And
I
I think,
wonder if AI will be taught to. Will someone attempt to teach AI to play? Maybe it's never occurred to the sorts of people who make AI. I don't know.
that'd be interesting.
Good question.
I just was blown away because I started looking at people that I saw had the most joy in life were very playful people. Like, I was just thinking about my dad, and he's like brilliant. He's like top of his class at U of I, and he built a whole plant nursery garden center. He knew like 3,000 plants by their botanical name, like insanely smart. And he reads like an hour every morning, so he like knows all the history and everything. And he's always been a very playful person, but probably one of the hardest working people I know.
Mm.
But he always enjoyed everything he did. And then I see other people that put in the same hours but don't have a playful attitude. They're nowhere near as smart. They don't remember anything. Everything's a drudge and they're always trying to escape. But my dad would just, he loved working. It's all about the attitude.
He found the work that was play to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it really is like the attitude of your soul, which is something Viktor Frankl said. Answers for me. He said, you can take everything away from a man except his attitude of soul. How he postures himself is what he keeps.
Yeah, it seems like that's an ingredient. That process, that attitude is an ingredient in the process of habituation. Aristotle talks about the virtues as being required for habituation. I guess
Yeah.
I think that's an element as well, though connected to attitude, is that things that you've already cultivated the virtue relevant to, those things come more easily. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because the virtue is like a second nature, and acting according to nature is acting in a more easy manner than acting contrary to nature. Acting contrary to nature is what is meant by violence, right? Violence is that which is contrary to nature. And our virtues are second natures, our habits are second natures. And so once you've truly acquired a certain virtue, then exercising it ought to be natural to you. It's sort of flowing. It's just the kind of thing that you do. And so I guess what I'm imagining with the example of your father is that, yes, I'm sure his correct attitude throughout life made all the difference, but part of that probably manifests in the process of habituation of acquiring relevant virtues and then continuing to exercise them. And as you exercise the virtue that you have, it's pleasant. Like you enjoy that. You enjoy working that muscle of the soul. And so, not to diminish the role of attitude, but I think that's part of this kind of complex process of something becoming natural to you, something kind of flowing out from you, and you're going to be able to do that with things that are in accordance with your nature. In accordance with human nature, and maybe you're going to sort of zero in on certain things, and someone else is going to zero in on other things. But that just seems to me like a way of, frankly, glorifying God and like living up to our potential as creatures. Is like finding the inclinations that we have, that God or life or whatever has given us, and searching out those talents that we've been given and cultivating that. That's the parable of the talents. It's like, you've got certain talents, and this has a double meaning for us because it's the unit of money, but it's also like the skill, the thing you're good at, right? You have been given certain talents. Like, invest those talents, the ones that you were given. And if you don't do that, you're going to be a waste, right? But you want to grow those and discern the things that come naturally to you and find the best way of expressing and cultivating the things that already come naturally to you, because that to me seems like the concrete way of actually performing discernment about what your vocation is. It's like, I don't start in the abstract as like a human who could go in any number of directions. I start as a person. Like I start to be thoughtful about these things, and I'm already a couple decades into my life, right? Or at least a decade and a half when you start being thoughtful about the direction of your life. And at that point, you've already got certain habits and history and handicaps and excellences and so on. And you have to, it's not that you never cultivated things that you were weak at that juncture in your life, but there's if something comes easily to you, if something just draws your attention, then maybe pursuing that is the way to cultivate excellence in yourself most readily and most fruitfully. And then maybe that you're going to discover that thing, whatever it is, whether that's working in cars or being a painter or researching history or like whatever it is, like that thing is how it's going to do something great. I guess the way I think about it is that like God's not going to do anything great with you if you don't make yourself great in any respect. Like, and then but like the way to discern which parts of yourself to cultivate. Obviously, you want to be well-rounded and so on, but you're always already in the middle of life. You're already in the middle of the stream of you've already got certain habits and experiences and inclinations. And so discern the inclinations that you have, find what is best in them, and cultivate that. God will use you for something.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day how sometimes a lot of what we do is based out of an ulterior motive and like fear-based. Like you want to do good at school so you don't get a bad grade. It's like, well, now you're not actually investing yourself fully into the subject. You're trying to prevent a bad outcome. So the end game is to prevent this bad outcome. It's not the end game is to learn the subject. And it's insidious because you can still do a very similar type of work, but have a very different end. And so you're working towards this bad end. You don't want it to happen. But maybe if you didn't have to worry about that bad end, maybe you'd actually excel way better than you're doing because you're just finding all the good stuff in it while you're doing it. Your eyes are directed towards what you're doing, not towards this like fearful thing that may or may not happen. So it's distracting.
The world is full of a lot of like wild and wacky things, but there's also a lot of wild and wacky people in it. So
Yeah.
you actually can find the person who's already interested in the thing,
Yeah.
and then try to help them explain to you like, what is it about this thing that you love? Like, help me love the thing that you love. I think that's fundamentally what teaching is. The teacher is already in love with something, is trying to share with the student. This is why I love this thing and why you should love it too. This is what it is, the thing that I love. I know it so well because I love it so well, and here's why it's lovable. Here, fall in love with this thing also. That's what good teachers of all subjects and areas do. And so, yeah, the posture of the student, I think, is if it's not clear to me why this thing is lovable, like I got to start banging on doors and like find the teacher or the friend or whomever who does see the lovable thing in this.
Who can demonstrate the good to
Yeah.
you in a way that's comprehensible.
Yeah, share the secret of like what is magical about this thing, because there is something that exists.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think a lot of things too is like, at least for me, and I know for other students going through WCC, we were all wondering like, how is this applicable? Because we had no idea what was coming after. So we were all like, great, school's great, we love it all, but we're all kind of worried about what's happening after this. And so I think if we would have had peace about the future, I think we would have been able to invest ourselves way more. How to do that, I'm not sure. I think maybe that, like, don't worry about the future. Just find what you love doing now. Cultivate that, and you may find your future. That might be a good approach, actually.
I think it's a spiritual virtue that has to be cultivated because I think it runs contrary to certain physical, physical and evolutionary formed tendencies, right? I mean, there's a very real way in which our biology tells us prepare for winter, whether or not you enjoy it, whether or not it's fun, right? And so that there is this push and pull in our own spirit in its relation to our biology, right? Because for eons we've never really not been able to just not worry about the future, right? Um, which I think is why, in some ways, some of the elements of the message of the gospel is so hard to adapt, right? Oh, wait, how serious is he
About the lilies of the field.
about this lilies of the field stuff?
Yeah.
Because if he's really serious, how literal Christ is always serious. So then the question is
You always live.
he always literal? Yeah. 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 Right. And there have been certain rewards for people who just have buckled down and just done the thing, even though they don't enjoy it particularly. Right. So it's tough to just say, well, don't do that. Right. Wow. How are we doing on time, Pavlos? It's almost 11:30. Oh, we should wrap. Until next time. Until the next crisis in international statecraft calls us to the conference room on a Sunday evening. Well, it's been a pleasure, and we started with the extraction, and we ended up with a discussion of virtue and the best life. So we really got to a really great overview of some of the principles that we should be living our lives, which I think will help us discern then how do we apply that high level view to the more particular situations which we are finding ourselves. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Yes, likewise. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wrap.